Um, I am here with football all-star Jeremy Asiffo.
Good afternoon or good morning, good evening, whenever you're watching this podcast, ladies and gentlemen.
I'm here with his brother, up-and-coming mixed martial arts fighter and all-around mediocre human being, Michael Asiffo. And
Well, thanks. No,
go on, please. Any corrections there?
no, it's pretty on point. I am a mediocre human being.
Okay,
Yeah.
beautiful. And finally, we've got a special guest today. One of my coaches, an old school MMA Canadian legend who we have the pleasure of talking with on this podcast, Danny Beauclerc, who's been in more scraps in KFC Trinidad parking lots than I care to imagine. What's up, Coach? How you doing?
Hey, how you doing, guys? Thanks for having me.
No
Oh,
problem.
well, thanks for being here.
How's
Super
Go on.
jealous of Jeremy's voice there. What's it like not sounding like a 15-year-old boy? Is it cool? Does that help?
It definitely helps with the ladies.
See, I just want to record that from my voicemail or something and be like, this is Coach Danny.
you know the early 2000s rapper Bone Crusher? You remember him?
I don't. I'm
Oh.
super white.
Well, he sucks, but his voice is a carbon copy of Jeremy's. I don't know. Maybe a few members of our audience will get that reference, but
I think I've heard a few Bone Crusher tracks, but maybe I might be thinking of somebody else. But I've gotten a lot of Luther Vandross. Who else have I gotten? Barry White, but never any Bone Crusher. But thank you for the compliment, fellas.
it wasn't a compliment.
Oh, okay then. Well then.
But I'm sure you can rap twice as well as Bone Crusher, to be quite honest. Mike,
Yeah.
we got any news today? We're going to dive into the news?
Oh, okay. So in the news today, let me just pull up my little Google document. Nothing big. So, okay. So two pieces of news. The first piece is that Tory Lanez released a track and he sampled a very famous mixed martial artist. Can anyone guess which mixed martial artist it was? Anyone?
Oh, I know. It's Stipe Miocic.
Yes, yeah, for sure. No, it was Conor McGregor. Do we have David?
Yes,
Oh,
yes.
David.
Sorry.
Oh, wow, look at that.
No, that's just an artificial intelligence. Well, I guess there is no real David.
Do you know what's
We
funny?
finally got David on the line here too. I think David was hitchhiking the Mayan temples, and that's why he was late.
Hilarious. I've actually terraformed or transformed, I should say, into just a simulation. We're watching a lot of Matrix, so I'll be going with I'm a simulation for today.
I mean, I knew Wakanda's technology was advanced, but I didn't know it was that advanced.
We don't talk about them things.
So I wanted to. Oh, go on, Mike.
No. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I was actually just talking a little bit off air with Coach Danny over here, and one of the things that he told me was, and this is kind of, I mean, I'm obviously not as how do I put this? I haven't been in the sport quite as long as he has, but I still remember back to a time where, and I'm sure you guys do, at least Mike, where mixed martial arts it was still kind of raw, kind of like, I don't know how to describe it, but it didn't feel like a sport. You know what I mean? Like it felt brutal. It felt it felt like human cockfighting, and that was like, I've been doing this for like 10 years myself. So we were just talking about how a ton of coaches' fights were actually unsanctioned. And that, just thinking about that, that's terrifying to me. I mean, what level of unsanctioning are we talking here? Like no medics on site?
Yeah, no official medics. I mean, the good thing is most of the guys ringside or cage side, depending on where we were, had, some basic level of understanding of, concussions. Well, I mean, as well as they did at the time. Um, and, I think because we were aware that there weren't any, official medical staff there, fights were stopped typically pretty quickly. Like if someone got in a lot of trouble, they knew there was no one to stitch them up. They knew there was, we didn't do blood work. We didn't do, so things were stopped. A lot of guys would complain. I never did. If it got stopped and I thought I still had some fight in me, I was like, yeah, maybe I did, but you never know.
All right,
So yeah,
okay.
it was scary.
So let me ask you this, right? With a lot of those fights, like nowadays, there's like the amateur circuit, and then there's the pros, and then there's like a difference. Like for you, was it just like were a lot of those fights treated as like amateur? Were some of those fights treated as amateur, or was it just like first fight, it's a pro fight, and everything's allowed?
Yeah, well, rule wise, they were pro in terms of, uh, you know, don't bite, don't gouge, don't headbutt. The rules were pretty pretty laxed.
Mm-hmm.
But it was weird. And I was mentioning this to Stefano before he came on, is that it's difficult because some of them, first off, there was no fight camps. We just didn't do camps. It was, my coach would say it would be Tuesday night, and he'd say, hey, Friday, we're going over to this other gym, or we're going to rent out this space and have some scraps. We just called them smokers at the time. And the difficult thing was half the time they were real fights, in terms of the other guy was trying to sleep you. He's trying to like, I've had, where you touch gloves and the guy's throwing flying knees at your chin. So you're like, okay, this is a fight. And then, we've had other ones that were just hard sparring where you'd get in and touch gloves and the guy would leg kick you and you'd go, oh, okay, he's just sparring. So it was difficult because sometimes you didn't even really know, am I getting into a fight tonight or am I getting into a hard sparring session? So
Sorry,
I found psychologically that was tough sometimes, right? Like,
Yeah, I can imagine that'd be kind of unnerving, like not knowing whether you should get yourself into the mindset of like, am I going to actually fight someone, or are we just playing patty cake here, or what's going on? Is this guy going to try and elbow my face into a bloody mess?
exactly. And I think the coaches, you guys have seen, I'm assuming, been to demos and stuff like that. The coaches would always say, hey, this isn't a fight. This is hard sparring. And they would always give that disclaimer beforehand. And some guys would listen and some guys would just headhunt from the get-go. So it was like, it's hard to
Yeah,
tell what it was going to be.
Danny, I'm sorry. I just wanted to, for those of us who aren't as familiar with the differences between hard sparring and an actual fight, could you just go into what that difference is? Because I mean,
Yeah, of course.
yeah, because yeah, it's not as obvious. I've been lucky enough to do some sparring, but I don't know if any of it would be considered hard. So I want to know what that difference is.
Yeah, no problem. So typical sparring, and now this differs from coach to coach and gym to gym, but typical sparring at my camp is 30% power. So, you know, um, one of the biggest differences for me as a coach between sparring and fighting isn't even the power level. It's that, and I'm a Nazi about this with my guys. I probably shouldn't say that while I have the short hair, but you know what I mean.
On a podcast full of black guys, but yeah, go on.
Yeah, it's one of the two N words that I probably shouldn't use for the rest of the thing.
Fair, fair.
But
What's the other one? No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
nitrogen, Nazis and nitrogen. They're both off limits.
You know what? I did not see that coming, and frankly, I don't find it very funny.
That's right.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right. Go on. Go on.
So sparring, the big difference for me is, and the reason I don't put a lot of stock into sparring in terms of when people say, oh, well, this guy got lit up in sparring, is that sparring is a place to try things. So specifically when I'm sparring, when I used to spar, I would work on things that I sucked at. I'd consciously put myself in a bad position, or work on something where I knew I was weak, kind of a chink in my armor, so to speak. When I'm fighting, obviously, I'm looking to win, right? So obviously, everybody knows the difference in power, but in a fight, I am trying to execute as ruthlessly and efficiently as possible, and I need to stop this guy as quickly as I can. And sparring, it's a game. We're going pretty light. Hard sparring is usually around 75%, 80%. So you get your bell rung, but nobody's going out, nobody's going to sleep. Hopefully, some camps only hard spar, which to me is craziness. That's just concussion city. But yeah, so some of these events were full-on fights where these guys were trying to hurt you, and some of them were just throwing a little harder than they normally would. But for instance, one of my fights, I got dropped with a big right hand, fell onto my butt. The whole world was going wonky, and the opponent just waited for me to get up. And that wasn't because he was a striker only. It was a demo. So to him, it wasn't a fight. If that was a fight, I would have been in real trouble. So I was grateful for that one.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's an interesting debate to be had, and like I like your philosophy of in training you don't have to be trying to kill the other guy because nobody's going to get an extra win on the record or a medal or getting paid to lose those brain cells in training, and nobody's going to know about it at the end of the day. It's just improvement, and it's kind of a refreshing approach. Like I've been to a lot of I've kind of gym shopped a lot, and a lot of places it's just in training not quite no holds bar, but it's certainly a lot of guys having the attitude of if you start getting the better of me, this is going to escalate quickly into something that's not exactly cooperative.
Yeah, like just to kind of chime in on that. Like I think the main thing in all that is you're facing a man, right? Like or a person with pride, right? And like there's a girl in the gym or whatever, and let's say you're getting the better of somebody, and then all of a sudden they want to. What's like the first response when you get cracked? You want to crack them back, right? And I've been blessed, like with my training partners, that's not the case. And usually it's kind of closed door almost if you're sparring, where it's like everyone who's there kind of has like an experience of wanting to learn. But I want to ask you, it's like as a coach, and you've coached some pretty high level guys, has it ever happened in your gym where it's like, okay, I crack this guy, then I'm going to crack him back with something harder, and then he cracks him back with something harder, right? And what do you do to kind of curtail that? Pull these guys to the side and be like, hey, listen, that's a little too much.
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. One thing I think that has helped for me a lot is reminding my guys that I don't put any faith in sparring. What I mean by that is that I don't watch, if I watch Stefano spar one of my guys, I don't, at the outcome of that sparring session, there's no determination of who's the better fighter. To me, that's crazy. Because you make different decisions when you fight versus when you spar. For instance, when I spar Mac, who's one of my top guys, I'll execute things on him I wouldn't dare do if he was throwing 100% in 4-ounce gloves. You know what I mean? I'm making, like I said, I use that as a time to fix the holes in my game. So the outcome of sparring is rarely similar in my experience to the outcome of fighting. So I think when I remind my guys that I'm not making judgments based on their sparring, it takes their ego down. Because a lot of the time you'll see them when they start going blow to blow, they're looking at me. Like I got to make sure coach knows I'm the alpha male. I have to make sure coach knows I'm the top dog here. And when I remind them that I don't associate how they spar with who's the top dog, I think it takes that pressure off them. Nobody feels like they have to establish themselves when they come into the gym. I tell them all the time, I rank how good a fighter you are by how well you fight. Not by how well you spar. If you want to impress me as a fighter, go out and be dominant in the cage. Sparring's just a time for learning,
Makes sense.
In the training process, as a football player, defensive lineman, when you enter training camp, you start with your conditioning, and then you move on to things like pursuit, then you move on to tackling, and then you get to learn actual plays. As a coach, what's your philosophy for someone who's say wants to get into the sport of mixed martial arts? How does the training process go? What is the foundation? Same thing with learning anything. You have to learn foundational things, and then you get to learn actual subjects of what goes into that actual let's say understanding how to execute something. So what I kind of want to understand, what's the foundational part, of becoming a mixed martial artist, and then how do you build on that per se?
Right. Wow. It's a great one. So I tend to break things down into 4 categories: tactical, technical, mental, and physical. So from a coaching standpoint, that's the way I tend to look at things. So with each fighter, or let's say we would go from scratch, someone who just walked into the gym, the first thing I want to do is give them fundamental technique, basic fundamental technique, both on the feet and on the ground. So if someone is looking to compete in MMA, usually my rule for them is that they have to compete in Muay Thai, they have to compete in BJJ. I want them to feel comfortable with the purebred, so to speak. I want to make sure nobody goes in the cage thinking, man, I hope this doesn't go to the ground, or man, I hope I don't have to stand with this guy, because I think mentally you're beat there. And when you're competing with the jiu-jitsu guys and you're competing with the Thai boxers, I feel like you can go into MMA a little bit more like, okay, you know what I mean? I'm not a guy who dabbles in Muay Thai or dabbles in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I've competed in both of these. I'm quite comfy to go everywhere.
So Jiu-Jitsu being the most important subset, right?
Sambo. Sambo. If you can't do Sambo, Jiu-Jitsu is, if you can't do Sambo, wrestling, or Judo, or Aikido, I would go to Jiu-Jitsu.
Wow.
I'm teasing. So from a technique standpoint, once guys start sparring, we have a test at the gym to spar, then we start getting into the tactical, which in my opinion is far more important than the technical. The tactical fighter always beats the technical fighter, in my opinion. So we really start to work on tactics. So for instance, we have a white level class, which is where we spar. So I tell my fighters, I'm not adjusting technique tonight. I'm not going to actually adjust how you throw that straight right. I'm going to adjust when you throw it and at what range you throw it. Those to me are the more important things than the actual technique of throwing the punch correctly. You look at guys like Fedor, he's an easy guy to think of. His technical punch, not great. Breaks his thumb on every punch, kind of loops it, drops his opposite hand. But his tactical punch, he finds the chin out of a flying through the air Arlovsky every time. His tactical knowledge was unbelievable. So that's what I tend to focus on. Sorry, I don't know if I answered that correctly.
That's
interesting example with Fedor, because I remember his old fights with Minotauro Nogueira, and it's like, jiu-jitsu skill for jiu-jitsu skill. Maybe Fedor isn't the superior, I guess, technician on the ground, but he came in with such a good understanding of Nogueira's guard that he was just able to bait out all the attacks that he knew Nogueira was going to use, and then just counter them effectively, kind of use tactics to force the fight into the corner that he felt most comfortable in.
For sure. And I would say that I feel that Fedor is the superior MMA grappler to Nogueira. I don't think he's the superior grappler. Do you know what MMA, once you're able to hit, it poses so many different, your grips have to change, your posture has to change, your approach to everything has to change. So, yeah, I think when they can hit, Fedor's problematic on the ground for anybody.
Yeah. I'm sure a lot of you guys have kind of felt this. Maybe, Mike, maybe not you, because you came to striking before grappling, I'm pretty sure you came to it with the mindset of you wanted to do MMA, not just BJJ for BJJ's sake. But I remember personally for myself, I just started BJJ and judo before anything else. And I remember just finding out when punches got added to the equation, it's like, wow, my technique doesn't work and I'm doing a lot of stuff that's putting me in a dangerous position. And, I don't know if you guys have ever had that experience.
With MMA, I definitely feel like the gloves change everything. Like some punches you think like, oh, okay, I put my shoulder up, maybe I just put a guard up. You definitely have to be a lot more tighter and a lot more aware of your movement. But other than that, never really kind of felt like, oh, if I throw this punch, it's not like how it usually is when I'm holding the pads kind of thing. But I can definitely understand that whole point of oh, if I do this is what's going to happen, on the ground or something like that.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, there's some things in jiu-jitsu I think that are downright insane that people actually try who want to apply them in MMA. Like there's this one guard for those of you guys out there who don't know called deep half guard, where you literally pull your opponents on top of you and sit underneath them. And people like, I think Verdum's made it work and Nogueira's made it work. But other than that, it's like, why would you pull someone on top of you and sit there to take hammer fists repeatedly in the head? Nogueira could make it work because he's got a cinder block for a head. You know what I mean? But that's the exception, not the rule. It just, yeah, it's a good BS test,
Yeah, well, a great example of that is when Machida tried to go to deep half on Jones, and he got his arm trapped under that leg and just bombed from there. And I mean, like you said, if you can get to deep half, it's a very safe position. Your head's tucked in, but getting there it's a shitstorm.
That's Shogun, by the way, not Machida.
Oh, excuse me, Shogun. Thank you. Thank you.
I saw that fight the other day.
Brazilians all look the same to me. And we're cut. And we're
It's like, that's it. That's it. No.
Roll credits.
Well, okay. So, if you've heard some crying in the background, that's actually, Jeremy's real voice. No, okay. That's
Nice.
It's Danny actually has a child, a little boy or girl, Danny.
Little girl, yeah. She's turning, she'll be 1 next week.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah. But anyway, I wanted to ask you about that. So, like, what was kind of like your mentality? Did your mentality towards fighting change as soon as you kind of like started to have a family, or like
100%. Yeah, I mean, that's probably pretty cliched, I'm sure, but there's a certain amount of risk obviously involved in fighting, and you think to yourself like, no problem, it's a calculated risk, but as soon as you're holding that baby, you think it's selfish. Right now, you look at her and you go, I can't risk that. Another big concussion. I've had 7, and you think to risk 8, and 8 being the one where I can't speak correctly, or I'm having memory loss, or CTE is scary stuff. So I think, the second I was retired when I had her, but it's always in your head. Maybe I could go back and have a fight or two. And as soon as I held her, I was like, no, I'm done. Plus it's very difficult. My last fight, my championship title fight, I cornered 5 of my guys in the same night, and it's difficult to do that. It's difficult to wear both hats of coach and fighter, because but when I got in the cage, my voice was gone from screaming at my 5 fighters. I was gassed. Not to make excuses. I mean, I fought poorly regardless, but I could definitely feel the weight of cornering all night. So wearing both hats is very difficult.
I got a question, and this one goes to both to Danny, but also goes to Stefano and Michael as well. Which one do you prefer, coaching or fighting?
I would say that they're
fighting.
Yeah, okay. I would say that they're both extremely stressful in their own way. Like, coaching is stressful because you're not a Pokemon trainer. You can't control exactly what your student is about to do. And it drives you sometimes you're just screaming something. They're not doing what you've practiced for the past, 10 months, 2 years, however long. Right. And it's just frustrating. And there's obviously the fear that someone you care about very, very deeply, somebody that you look at as family, and they're not, they're in danger. But fighting is, I would say fighting, because there's a little bit more, I guess, satisfaction to be had afterwards. When you're done coaching, it's just like a giant sigh of relief. It's like, okay, they're but yeah, that's what I would say.
Nah, definitely fighting, and it's for that reason, is that you feel like your responsibility for somebody else, if they don't do well, you feel like you've led them astray, even if you're a sparring partner, you know what I'm saying? You almost take responsibility if they lose, and the stress of it all, it for that person is almost for me at least twofold. than like myself, right? Like myself, it's like I know what I'm doing. Like I know what I got to do. If
Okay,
I fail, it's on me.
let
Only
me flip it to
me
you
as a
this way though.
responsibility. Sorry.
Because I've seen you when you've both won and lost fights, and just a sneak peek behind the anatomy of a fighter, behind the mind of a fighter, or mentality of a fighter, I should say, um, is that even when you win or when you lose, you still feel, especially when you lose, you feel like you've let your team down, even as a fighter. So even though I agree with what both of you are saying in terms of, yeah, you feel responsible for another person, in a way that responsibility is still there as a fighter. You're just now at the front lines.
I
But,
disagree.
okay.
I'd personally disagree because when I'm fighting, I'm too concerned. That whole like, oh, I've let everyone down. For me, at least, that's something that I start feeling when I'm able to process those emotions long after the fight. Immediately after, win or lose, I just have this like kind of moment where it's just like the it's
Thank God he
so.
got
Yeah, well, for myself, I mean, like it's relief is the first thing after you fight as well, and then it's just like it's just the raw emotional shock of being in a situation where you feel like your life is on the line, you know. But like if you lose, I mean, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe you guys have a different opinion on it, but like if I lose, I feel like that kind of like I let my team down feeling doesn't really come until weeks or days or like hours at least later. I'm still processing what the hell just happened.
I mean,
Sorry,
it's
Danny, what do you
there.
think as well?
Sorry,
Sorry to
go
cut you
ahead.
off, Michael.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah, I definitely prefer coaching, but I think that's because I'm 10 times the coach I was fighter. I just was not. I was a mediocre fighter. Um, I mean, in fairness to me, 55 was tough. Yeah, I was not. I was typically giving up a lot of size. Um,
By 55, he doesn't mean years old. He means 155 pounds,
oh,
if you guys
sorry,
are wondering.
sorry. Fighting at 155. When I was fighting, it was the smallest division. And the first real beating, like a bad beating, I had to go to the hospital. I remember going into the locker room with the guy after. He was just big. He was just a big dude. And I remember saying to him, and the worst part was he was a big dude and a better technical fighter than me. And I remember getting into the locker room, ice on my face and Kleenex up my nose, and saying to him like, "Hey man, what's your walking weight?" And he's like, 176, 178. I was like, I just remember thinking I walked at 142. And I just remember thinking like it was daunting trying to deal with the reach and the power and stuff like that. But sorry, so coaching I could always just do. I could see. I think my gifts lay in seeing the fight and seeing the strategies as opposed to executing them. Whereas my best fighters are executioners. They're guys. They're like Neo. You can plug them in and teach them a technique, and 2 days later they're submitting people, high level guys with it. And I was just never quite like that.
it.
Sorry,
No,
go ahead.
go ahead. No,
Oh,
go ahead.
I just wanted to add some context. Danny fought his last fight at 125 pounds, and like that that's a big jump. That's a jump of 3 weight classes, and I don't know. I'm personally appreciative that people of his generation did things, as irresponsibly as fighting somebody, Mike's size, right?
Yeah.
So that they could pave the way for guys like me to fight at an appropriate weight class because yeah, I don't know. That's
Yeah. Sorry, I
Thanks.
just want to jump in and say like, yeah, no, that's why I guess I thought it would be it, it's interesting to hear from Danny because obviously you've been in MMA before it was even really a recognizable thing in Canada. So
Right.
my question to you is, what do you think other than standardization, regulation, um, and people being more well-rounded in both stand-up and on the ground, what do you think has been the biggest change in the last like 10 to 15 years in MMA in terms of the average person who walks into an MMA gym 10 years ago versus the average person who walks in right now? What do you think would be the biggest change in their experience? And what's been your kind of survey of the land in the last 10, 15 years?
Well, these are great. These are really good questions. I'd say the culture of MMA in general. I think it coming out of the darkness, so to speak. It being this taboo, like exactly like Stefano said, human cockfighting and illegal most places. The number one thing we get at the gym when someone comes in and they meet me and I'm this little guy and I'm not intimidating. I think people assume they're going to come into a gym and get the crap beat out of them, or we're going to be a bunch of meatheads and everybody's hard sparring and there's blood everywhere and people are getting knocked out. And in fairness to a lot of these people, if you go back far enough, there were more gyms that were like that. A lot of those gyms were really rough. They were having bare knuckle fights on Tuesdays to raise money and stuff like that. So they used to be a lot harder. So I think now what you're getting a lot more normal people who are just recreationally training MMA, and that really helps because it starts becoming more accessible to people. People realize that this isn't some freakish meathead guy who grew up fighting. It's like a banker or a lawyer or a janitor or something like that. Just everybody's training. So I think that's one of the biggest differences, that it's accessibility. It's become very mainstream. Whereas, even 10 years ago, if you were training MMA, you were probably training to fight. Whereas now I would say 85 to 90% of people are training for the fitness element or just the enjoyment of it.
Interesting. So it kind of distills down to like, yeah, it seems like it's a lot more, I guess, incorporated into the zeitgeist now. It's a lot more normalized, whereas before it was a lot more marginalized, a lot more, in the dark, smoky back rooms with, bikers taking illegal bets and.
Yeah, exactly. And something I wanted to say with the question about letting the team down. My first fight, leading up to the fight, everybody said, just like they say to all fighters, and I'm sure you guys have experienced this, where they say, "Are you afraid? Are you afraid?" And I kept saying no, and I can honestly say that when I was asked, I meant it. I didn't feel any fear. And everybody said, "Oh, I'd be afraid. I'd be afraid." I'm like, "Nah, it's all good." And we started walking out to the cage, and it hit. I was like, "Oh, I'm afraid. Now I'm afraid." It hit like a punch in the gut. And I was getting into the cage. I remember looking across at the guy who, again, was bigger and stockier and just generally meaner than me. And I remember thinking distinctly, like, I don't want to let Coach down. First thing I thought was, I'm embarrassed to get embarrassed. What if my coach thinks differently? And they're about to close the cage door, and my coach taps my shoulder and turned around and he said, "Danny, this is very important. Look at me." So I remember looking at him, and he said, "There's nothing that can happen in the next 15 minutes that changes my opinion of you." He said, "This is I've had losses. Everybody has losses. Go in there, do what you do." And I could just feel the weight come off me. Like, I was still afraid, obviously, but that fear of or the lack of fear of letting him down, right? It was very smart coaching just to say to him, like, "Listen, go and do your best. Nothing changes." That helped a lot. That took a lot of the fear out of me, and not the fear of my opponent, but the fear of letting down the team, like you guys were saying.
The right coach just knows exactly what to say, I guess. That's phenomenal advice. Like the right coach can kind of just have those few magic words that will just put you in the right zone based on their understanding of what you need in that moment. And yeah.
100%.
Yeah. Sorry, and I just wanted to agree with you and say that that's kind of like the beauty of MMA and really any combat sport, is that what's more embarrassing than getting knocked out, or than accepting your kind of your mortality, if you will. So it's crazy it's always interesting to see how fighters talk about that fear of embarrassing themselves, but in reality, fighters in a lot of ways tend to be the most courageous people, because they don't care if they get embarrassed, or they've been embarrassed in front of people, or they've kind of accepted that failure is a part of competition, especially in a sport like MMA where people lose. So yeah, no, that's interesting that you say that. I just want to say that.
As a football player, I if I were to ever get into coaching, I think it would probably be more in the weight room, or pertaining to nutrition, because it's you and the weight, it's you and food. It's not you and another person. I've been asked to help guys to be an assistant coach, and having to prepare guys to go up against another person. You have to use a lot of terminology that someone like me, I just get. Like, I've been playing it for 10 years. So if you tell me to do something, all you have to do is show me and I'll be able to do it because I have that kinetic knowledge or that spatial knowledge to kind of do it. But in terms of coaching, you need to use a certain kind of vocabulary. And I kind of think that's why Mr. Miyagi used, the paintbrush and the wax on, wax off, because like certain things, you're not going to tell somebody, oh, if somebody punches you like this, do this, do that, because it's kind of hard to kind of verbalize that. So I kind of wanted to ask, and I was kind of thinking of the same thing as David when these kind of stories about someone like Floyd Mayweather is going to get into training. I wanted to know from your opinion, somebody who's competed in the sport and has that mentality of a competitor. Do you think he would be able to? Do you think it's going to be a seamless transition, or do you think it's going to be a difficult transition for someone like Floyd, who's uh, been so spectacular in competing and being an actual competitor, to actually become a trainer and have to verbalize his techniques or his skills into competing against another human being? Like, I'm trying to word this properly, but do you think he'll be able to make that transition into becoming a trainer?
I think with Floyd, one of the difficulties, and now I've never met him personally, but I think he's clearly gifted, and often what we see in the sport is that the gifted guys struggle with coaching because they could always just do it.
Yeah.
You say, Mac, I'll use one of my fighters as an example. He came into me, came into the gym. I said, throw a kick. So he throws one kick. I said, okay, I want you to change A, B, and C. And he goes, coach. And the next kick, A, B, and C were corrected. I mean, like, I gave him minimal coaching and bam, he could just do it. So I think he'll struggle a little bit more than me to teach the kick because I had to go through step 1, step 2, step 3 relentlessly. I had to, use different analogies to help my brain remember. I had to really break it down, whereas Mac could just do it. So as much as that helps as a fighter, I think it might, and I'm not knocking him as a coach. He's actually a pretty good coach. But I think it hinders you a bit in the fact that you never had to go through those steps. You could always just do it. And Floyd strikes me as a guy who could just do it. You know what I mean? And not to say he hasn't worked hard. Like, obviously he's worked his ass off. But coaching wise, I could just see him being like, well, no, just do it like this. Ba, 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 ba. And looking at the guy like, why can't you do that?
Yeah.
I'm sure he'll be able to. Sorry, Stefano.
Go ahead.
I'm sure he'll be able to give guys great drills, help them with great pad work.
Sure.
But when it comes to being a coach ringside, I feel like he might struggle a little bit. How do you feel how he'll perform as a coach ringside?
Yeah, I mean, I think he'd be his comfort. Sometimes it's kind of symbiotic. His comfortability with the situation can sometimes transfer to the fighter. The fact that Floyd's never lost and that he's so dominant, sometimes even just having that guy in your corner can be a big deal to the fighter. Some of that confidence and that alpha energy kind of bleeds over to the fighter. So it could certainly be good that way. That being said, he hasn't endured a lot of difficult times in the ring. I mean, has he ever been really dropped?
I mean, he got cut one time by Maidana, but that was it.
Right.
And if you guys know Emmanuel Augustus put it on him.
Oh yeah, he gave him a fight.
But yeah, fair point. I mean, he's not exactly somebody who's had to go through the peaks and valleys of losses and rebuilding yourself. But to be fair, I think Floyd might be the exception because I agree that the best fighters are not always the best coaches because of that reason that you went into. When I think of Floyd, though, I do think of somebody who had to make some major adjustments to his style. Like, if you guys remember, there was Pretty Boy Floyd, and then there was Floyd Money Mayweather. And I feel like they were two completely different fighters. And I don't know if it was due to the frequent hand braking or just being older and having to compensate as far as, limiting the amount of exchanges he was in and the amount of trauma he was going to take in his career. But somewhere along the line, he switched from, a more pressure-oriented aggressive fighter to, a very defensive counter fighter who made use of the shoulder roll and kind of tried to outpoint guys over the distance.
Yeah.
So just that change up in his style, at least to me, for Floyd at least, it gives me a little bit of hope that he might be able to, have explain to fighters, coach them through their development, because I have seen that kind of development through his career where it's like, I've been doing this one thing, I've had this one style for most of my career, and then now I'm switching to something else, and that kind of development in his I guess his style gives me confidence.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah,
Plus,
it's easier.
from a family of coaches as well.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. I think Floyd, he gets in, gets his points, and then he goes on defense.
Mind you, I don't know if you guys have seen some of those videos of like behind the scenes of Floyd Mayweather's gym. Oh my God, it's absolute anarchy in there. Like I've seen clips where, two young fighters will kind of have beef against each other, and then Floyd will be over there making bets with like, a stack of cash in his hand, and they'll literally settle it like a fight in the gym between sparring partners. It's mayhem, and he's laughing like it's all a circus. It's nuts.
Wow.
Okay, Stefano, I gotta jump in here and say that I'm sure if there's one thing Floyd Mayweather is known for is his tendency to aggrandize and over-exaggerate. I'm sure that he's definitely hyping stuff up.
No, it's on video. Like this is like documented.
No, I'm not saying that it wasn't documented. I'm just saying just he's a king of marketing, so I doubt there's anything leaving that gym without his blessing. So,
Mind you,
I doubt on the daily. Sorry, go on.
No, I was just gonna say I thought Floyd was renowned for his prolific ability to read.
No, but that's the thing. But there's no way you could. Well, I you know what? Let me not assume anything. But yeah, I just find it unlikely that you can cultivate a culture of strong, top elite level fighters if everyone is knocking each other out, and you're having pretty much side bets.
Hey, what Wanderlei Silva's on the phone, and he'd like to bring your attention to Shootbox. Him and Shogun literally got into a fight over who was going to take home a puppy, and apparently Wanderlei ended up knocking him out and taking home that puppy. So like, dude, you'd be especially in a sport like MMA where, while like Coach said earlier, it's getting quite a bit more, mainstream and professional in its nature. Even today, there's still a lot of questionable practices and characters.
Yeah, absolutely. We had two guys come in to sign up last year. Really nice guys. I'd say like mid-20s. Both of them beat to hell. Like eyes, mouse under the eye, like swelling of the lips and stuff. So my first assumption when they came to the front desk was they'd been jumped, or they'd been in some kind of scrap, and they're here to learn how to fight. Turns out they signed up at a local gym for 1 year, so prepaid for a year. At that point, they were taken into the ring to spar with the pros. These guys have never thrown a punch. Like, they're U of T students. They're not athletes. They're just normal recreational guys. They paid for a year up front. They put them in the ring, and these pros beat the tracks off these two guys, which is just like,
that's terrifying,
right? And they've got their money, right? So to that particular gym owner, they've paid. They've done all he needs them to do. I think at that point he's actually trying to dissuade them from coming back by putting them in. I mean, like, that stuff's just, it gives us a terrible name,
There's some people where it's like these, they've got these elite level fighters. It's like, this is my cash cow, and everybody else is fodder for this, this meal ticket. Mike, I don't know if you guys wanted to get into it, but did you guys see the upcoming UFC card that's planned for May? That's definitely going to happen on Fight Island.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
So,
was trying to find
Yeah,
a
I
way to.
did see
I
that.
was trying to find a
First of
way
all,
to like segue to that. Like,
yeah, no, wait. First of all, it's funny how it's definitely not gonna be on an island. So once again, it just
How
goes to show
dare
that.
you?
Pardon?
How
it will
dare
be
you
on
kill my
Fighter
dream?
Island. There will be at least one finish him said by Bruce Buffer, at least one.
I'm
Um,
I'm
and it'll be
picturing
awesome.
I'm picturing a bunch of chained tigers just Coliseum style around the ring with Joe Exotic just egging them on with a cattle prod.
Oh, I hope Carol Baskin's there.
Jeez.
Yeah, this is getting into mayhem. I mean, both mayhem in the fact that the card is absolutely stacked, and
Stacked.
mayhem in the fact that I assume nobody really believes at this point that it's going to happen.
Actually, for this one, I'm a little bit more positive. For some reason, I just think that because the UFC own the Apex facility, um, they have kind of like the leverage to do a little bit more. Their previous plans were just so random and they looked like
Rush.
so, yeah, they looked like almost rushed. But this, like, there's a little bit of time. We have almost a month until the card. They can get through all the legal work that they'll need to get to. They can, quarantine people and get all the medical testing that they're going to need to get. If we have an extended self-isolation period. And
And
honestly,
America is slowing down in the coronavirus. Yeah.
okay, let's
That's
take it
that's
easy.
not true.
That's not
That's
true.
not true.
But
No, but they're.
Florida
what's interesting though
Florida just
is
reported an extra 1,000 cases that took place in a day
Well,
after.
because they opened everything back up. That's their damn fault. But I'm talking about there's certain areas. Where is the Apex? Oh, the Apex is in Florida. That's right.
No,
No, it's
no, it's
not.
in Vegas.
Oh,
Jeremy, no. Quit misinforming the public, man. Come on.
my bad.
We look to you as a beacon of information on this
My bad.
podcast.
no,
My
but
bad.
let's just say, what's it called? Oh man, I don't even know what I was gonna say. No, but it's interesting that this is still happening. Because a lot since the UFC announced this, a lot of other franchise, no, not franchises, organizations and leagues globally have pretty much decided to kind of create some kind of alternative plan to end their season or find some kind of champion or continue business as normal. So I think this one might actually, if not on May 9th, the card might actually happen.
So, okay, I think the main issue with it is that like a lot of it does seem shady in the sense of like when you look at, for example, the WWE, for example. Like I know wrestling. Why are we talking about wrestling? But when you look to them as a business, they basically. I'm not saying when I say this, I'm not saying that Donald Trump took a bribe. Okay, but what I am saying is an $18 million payment was made towards Donald Trump's campaign, and, and then the WWE was named an essential business in Florida. Two unrelated, maybe not, things that happened, right? So what I'm saying to you is there's ways that I think that the UFC can there's things the UFC can do that I think make this event viable.
Hold
I think
on.
Damon knows it,
Hold
and
on,
I
Mike.
think yes.
I think I know what you're insinuating.
I am
And
not
and
insinuating
I
anything,
think
good sir.
I'd just like to say that the fact that you think American democracy is corrupt and broken offends me to
How
my
dare you?
core.
Yeah.
How
How dare
dare
you,
you?
Mike?
How dare you suggest that the American system doesn't work anymore? How dare you, sir?
I am not insinuating anything. I'm just saying there was an $18 million payment, and the WWE is all of a sudden an essential business. Take with
But
that what you will.
the WWE was going on with shows as it was just closed door shows. And to be honest, the UFC's date, which is May 9th, I believe, if we start loosening up regulations, and especially with combat sports where you know there is an exchange of bodily fluids, and the amount of personnel involved in an event is just astounding. From media to coaches training the fighters up to the event. I think if sports, because May 9th is, it's quite a long ways away. If the WWE and other events like it start being given a free pass, especially in Florida, which has actually declared all professional sports an essential service, there's going to be some carnage. And then we're going to have to backtrack a bit, take a few steps back and say, I'm not really sure that this is worth it. I think even then, the most hard-nosed doubters of this pandemic are going to, forced to take a deep, long look at what should and shouldn't be allowed.
Oh, yeah, no, I agree. It's just, like, I'm saying there's things they can do to get this card going. Am I saying it's good? No, but I'm saying that, like, I wouldn't put it past Dana. I'll say this. I wouldn't put it past Dana, whether morally above board or below board, to get this card on the air. That's all I'll say.
Coach, what do you think? If Fight Island is anywhere in the world, and you had to hazard a guess, where would it be?
I would guess off the coast of California, just out of convenience for Dana, I would think. Although that's going to be pricey. You could probably go up to Oregon or something like that, or something more northern and get a much cheaper island. But then you got to deal with, it couldn't be an outdoor fight. It could be, but weather's dependent. It's tough to say.
Yeah, I'm just happy that we're going to be getting like a bit of how do I put this? If the fight does end up happening, it's going to be a bit of like a different look for the UFC. In that we're typically the UFC has the same production again and again and again, and who knows. If this does end up happening and, God forbid, we don't have multiple cases among fighters, maybe it'll entice them to, like, switch things up visually a little bit. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and, Tony gets to live another day, so that's good for him. Because Khabib would have hurt him. But,
really? Interesting.
Thank you. Another person who sees the light.
Did you guys see that he still made weight for the fight?
Yeah, I did see that.
Yeah, he's crazy. I don't know that I agree necessarily. Okay, I don't know that I could say.
Let me ask the coach. Can I ask the coach?
Yeah.
Okay, coach. Okay, if you had Tony Ferguson, you're training Tony Ferguson. Tony comes to you and he says, "Hey, I'm thinking about still making weight for this canceled card." What would you tell him?
I think that depends on how hard it is for him to make that weight.
Michael, you're looking kind of blurry. Sorry to interrupt you, Coach. You're looking.
No, it's okay. Blurry. Yeah, he is blurry. There we go. Oh, there we go.
Sorry?
Oh, you were blurry. Oh, you went blurry again.
Sorry to interrupt.
It's okay.
Okay.
There we go. You're back. I think I would. It would depend. If he's one of those guys who needs to IV or you know what I mean? If it's something that's taken a year off his life, I would tell him not to cut weight. I don't know what Tony walks at, so I don't know how hard a cut it is for him. So I think that's
200 pounds, just to give you backstory.
You're joking. 200 pounds.
I heard 200 pounds. I've heard 200 pounds.
No way.
He's even confirmed it, but I don't know if he was joking around because he was on Chael Sonnen's podcast. But I heard from people that's 200 pounds. Like he walks around 190, 200.
Good Lord. Yeah, then I would definitely not have him cut weight for this because that's a massive cut.
Especially considering he's actually potentially lined up to fight in like less than a month's time. Like, why would you put yourself through that twice in 1 month?
And that's why I think he, if anyone, has a good shot against beating Khabib. I'm not saying that I believe he'll beat Khabib, but I'm saying it's an interesting test. I think he has potential to be first of all, he defies all logic. The fact that he was able to defeat Anthony Pettis 6 months out of a knee replacement surgery, an ACL replacement, is insane. But it's one of those things where, not that I'm saying he'll necessarily beat him, but if anyone's going to beat Khabib, it's somebody who brings a different stylistic question to the table, because largely we know what Khabib's going to do. And primarily the opponents he's been able to do it against aren't strong grapplers. They've been strikers, they've been all-around mixed martial artists, but they haven't been people that pose kind of that unique threat of Ferguson. And I think that Gaethje's wrestling abilities presents a similar technical question. Not that I think he'll win necessarily, he might, but I think it's an interesting, I'm not super sold on the idea that Khabib's just going to smash.
I'm not saying he's going to smash him. I'm not saying it's not going to be a good fight. I'm just saying, like, I have Khabib winning. I would put a couple shekels on that too.
No,
really?
I agree. I mean, he belongs in the cage with Khabib. There's no question. My opinion is that Tony's a little too jiu-jitsu focused, and I don't think that's going to play well with Khabib on top of you. I think Khabib's gas tank is a crazy thing. And I just can't see. I've just never seen anything in Tony's arsenal that makes me super nervous for Khabib. I think Khabib will outstrike him. I think he'll smother him.
Really? Outstrike him?
He outstruck Conor McGregor. Let's be real.
Yeah, but that was
the biggest single shot in that fight was Khabib.
But that was completely under different context, though. The reason he even landed that big shot was because he had been, dominating him on the ground for 3 rounds at this point. And he was Conor McGregor was kind of scared of the takedown. That's why he was able to land that shot, don't you think? Like,
of course.
And wouldn't you also say that, Tony Ferguson throughout his career has proven to be a dynamic striker who can hang with the best? Anthony Pettis. I mean, the list goes on.
Edson Barboza,
Cerrone. The list really goes on.
Yeah, he's great. It's not that I think Tony isn't very, very, very good. I feel like it's a style mismatch. I feel like Conor had the best shot of beating Khabib in terms of he only has to hit him once. And Conor's takedown defense is pretty stellar. I mean, I know there's a lot of casual fans who are like, oh, Conor has no takedown defense. Conor has unreal takedown defense. It's just that Khabib's a different level of grappler. I think I totally agree with you that the only reason he landed that punch is because Conor was defending the takedown. But I feel like the same thing will happen with Tony. I don't think there is a fighter on the world that is okay being underneath Khabib for very long.
So that's part of the way of scoring points. You have to set it up. So therefore you landed more strikes. Exactly. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I think GSP outstruck every striker he ever fought on the premise that they were guarding the takedown. And I feel like that gives Khabib I feel like within the confines of MMA, he's the better striker. That might sound crazy, but I mean that wrestling and that sambo opens up his hands so much. He also
I think he's actually very defensively responsible. Like he does some things that, like, he's got that post and retreat I really like. He's got a good jab. His overhand, of course, is nice, but a lot of people don't really talk about, like, just that defensive responsibility that he has when he does strike. He never puts himself in, like, real dangerous spots with his striking. Like, his hands don't drop. Yeah. I don't see any, like, issues when he's throwing, like, no wing punches. He can be a little robotic at times, in my opinion, but it's not, like, I don't see, like, issues, like glaring issues in striking.
It's like a Damian Maia where you don't have to do it all on the feet. You just have to have a couple of things that work well for you enough to set up the rest of the game, like how Damian Maia developed that left straight. But mind you, just back on the topic of the matchup, I just wanted to pose this question to Coach. Do Tony's elbows, like, especially from the bottom, give you any pause for concern as far as Khabib's top game? Because I think, I'm not saying they will, but it's an interesting question that maybe these could be the threats that we're looking for that could be a deterrent to a really strong top game.
For sure. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think that there are a number of aspects of Tony's game that are dangerous to Khabib. I mean, like, I don't think it's an easy fight at all. I don't think it's the hardest fight he's had in terms of style matchup.
Interesting.
I think Conor was the real concern. Just in terms of the gap in the striking on the feet was very, very high. Sorry about the baby. And I think the elbows from the bottom, they can open cuts for sure, but I just think he'll be trading them, and gravity's on Khabib's side. He's just so aggressive there. Did you see Khabib rolling with the number 1 ranked high schooler in the country? Did you see that with Cormier filming?
No.
It's incredible. Now, granted, it's a kid. This kid's 18 or 17, but he's ranked number 1 in the U.S. in wrestling, and Khabib just smothers him, just like, just ragdolls him. It's scary. So I just see him putting Tony on his back and holding him there. But again, I wouldn't be stunned if Tony won. I wouldn't be confused and flabbergasted. I mean, he's ridiculously good. But for me, Conor was the real, in terms of matchups, the real scary fight.
What about Gaethje Khabib? Because that's a matchup I think a lot of people are. Yeah. A lot of people are sleeping on that matchup, and I think Gaethje's wrestling could potentially, be enough to stave off Khabib. Personally, I like his chances against Khabib a little better, just because I find it's a lot easier to beat someone's wrestling when you're not necessarily trying to go takedown for takedown with them. You're just thinking defensively, wrestling wise. And I think potentially Gaethje's wrestling could be enough to, stave off Khabib, provided he keeps it a very defensive mindset.
For sure. And just before Danny jumps in, I just want to add that I would assume and hope that if Khabib were to fight Justin, that we would have what happened when we had, and I keep referencing this fight, Kamaru versus Colby, where we have 2 excellent wrestlers who kind of draw a line in the sand and are like, you know what, we're not wrestling today. Today it's gonna be a stand up because our wrestling kind of cancels each other out. So
I'll tell you what, if that happens, it's not gonna be good for Khabib.
That's what I'm saying, because Justin is probably the hardest hitter in the division.
Conor?
Yeah. What about Paul Felder? Huh?
Ooh, I don't know. I like Paul Felder, but
no, I know. I just had to throw him in.
I like Paul Felder, but I don't know if I like him against Justin Gaethje.
Yeah. I think that
Good.
Oh, sorry. I think what Stefano said is right. If you play defensive with Khabib, and like you said, not try to put him on his back and just strike and defend the takedown is probably the best approach. I think the difficulty with someone like Khabib is that when we're talking tactics of takedowns, there are 2 types: proactive takedowns and reactive takedowns. And reactive takedowns, you only see the highest level guys executing those consistently. So a reactive takedown meaning that Gaethje's coming forward with heavy hands and leaves himself exposed to that takedown. So the problem with fighting a guy like Khabib or like a GSP, by the way, GSP the only man I think who consistently beats Khabib. But if we look at those types of fighters, if you mount any kind of offense on them, you're giving up the takedown. If you don't mount offense, your back's against the cage for the whole fight. So it's very difficult. If you don't tee off on a guy like Khabib, he's going to put his shoulder into you and minimum put your back against the fence and just hold you for 5 rounds, which is a shit fight to watch, but Khabib will probably win that. Or you come aggressively forward and you get put on your back. Now, that's not written in stone, right? Obviously, he's human and he can make mistakes, but having that level of reactive takedowns that he has makes him a nightmare, even when you're the better striker, I feel.
Yeah.
That's my 2 cents on Khabib.
Okay, so let me ask you guys a question with this one. Tony Ferguson, Justin Gaethje, who we got on that one? If it were to happen.
I think
That's
Ferguson.
really, eh?
Yeah.
What gives you guys such confidence? Because I think of that matchup and I just think utter chaos.
Yeah, it's hard to call. I maybe I don't believe it as confidently as I said, but it's just the first name that comes to mind. Yeah.
Do you know what always
I
gives
got
me?
Tony.
For
You got
me,
Tony.
Yeah.
sorry.
I'm confident in Tony's ability to win, but do you know what always gives me pause when Tony Ferguson's fighting, especially against someone who hits as hard as Gaethje? Ferguson, while he's very good in all areas and reckless to a degree and has managed to survive everything that every opponent has thrown at him, it's one of those cases like a BJ Penn where he's able to absorb a hellacious beating, but at the same time, with every passing fight, I'm wondering, is this going to be the next one where he's finished? You know what I mean? Because I'm struggling to think of a Tony Ferguson fight where he didn't absorb a beating. I'm not saying that this will be the one, right? But it always gives me cause for concern when he's
But
fighting.
the interesting thing about that, and just quickly for me, is that not only does Tony Ferguson take a beating, but he also inflicts beatings during his fights. But the same can also be said about Justin Gaethje, who also has a really high strike, like a strike per minute or whatever that statistic
Strikes
is.
absorbed? Like
Yeah,
strikes absorbed? Yeah.
strikes absorbed as well as strikes thrown per minute or something like that. He's one of the highest too. So
For
I
sure.
think that if both of them were to get into it, that it would be obviously a high volume strike fight. But for me, Ferguson's just a little. He seems to thrive a little bit better in those situations where you're throwing, I'm throwing, and it's all about who can last the storm a little better. As you can see, Justin Gaethje has already lost a fight like that when he fought. It's escaping me right now, but
Eddie Alvarez and
sure,
and
yeah,
Dustin Poirier.
Dustin Poirier is the one I'm thinking about, and Dustin Poirier is a good fight. He's a really good fighter, but I mean, he saw what happened when he went in with Khabib.
Well,
So
two different fighters, I'd say, in that Khabib brings a takedown threat, whereas Poirier, southpaw, who was really investing in the body in that fight, and that kind of body work is. Do you know what? Tony does invest in the body quite a bit. Come to think of it, he throws out that front kick. He's got that really awkward step up left body kick. The one thing, because point taken, I did forget how defensively irresponsible Gaethje can be, but it seems to me that over the course of their careers, Gaethje's become more defensively responsible. We've got this new Justin Gaethje 2.0 who's comfortable taking a step backwards in order to avoid damage and then reapply the pressure like he did against Barbosa, like he did against James Vick. Whereas Ferguson, I don't know if you guys saw his run through the Ultimate Fighter. It's interesting. If you go back and watch it, you look at a very defensively responsible fighter who's patient, takes the first round not off, but mostly to find the counters before he starts really pressuring, using all kinds of parries and slips as well as high elbow guards, just a variety of defense. And it seems like, to me at least, Tony Ferguson has gotten less defensively responsible in recent years as opposed to Gaethje, and kind of made a stylistic choice to apply more pressure and put himself in a little bit more of the line of fire, like David said, kind of thriving in those dogfights.
Yeah.
What do you guys think? No?
Oh, no. Sorry, I was. Yeah, I agree. I think too that part of when we were going back to the Khabib thing, what I realized is part of my mentality is that every Russian, I know he's Dagestani, but every fighter I've trained with from that part of the world is just a different level of hard. There's just, I mean, I'm obviously generalizing, but the Russian fighters I've trained with have just will take immense abuse without changing their facial expression. There's one, I can't remember what fight it was, but there's footage of Fedor getting hit by someone back in the day, and it's a big looping punch, and it comes in, it's like the Phantom Cam, super slow motion, and it hits Fedor's chin, and he doesn't blink, he doesn't look away. It's just stuff like that is terrifying. I've been doing this my whole life, and if you jab at me, you blink, you flinch a bit. That's just human nature. But some of those, specifically the Russian fighters, seem to be on a different level.
They're putting something in the borscht over there that is.
Yeah. There's yeah.
That's funny. That's funny.
I was.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Go ahead.
I was doing a guard pass with a Russian fighter once where you trap the wrist behind his back. And I'm passing guard, and so I've trapped his wrist behind his back, and I'm starting to move my hips, and I just hear, and it sounds like popsicle sticks, and it's a distinct break, and I stopped right away and said, whoa, and time out to him, and he looked at me and he said, "It is thumb, my thumb broken, no problem, keep rolling." I remember being like, "No, man, we can stop. It's like that. That's a definite break." He's like, "Yes, thumb break. We continue. I tape after." I was like,
What?
These you hear that stuff and you just go, okay, like I don't want to spar this guy,
It's almost like a reckless disregard for consequences with their own body.
Yeah.
Like they just don't care. I had a similar experience. I was rolling with this Russian guy who came into my gym, and he was trying to put it on me, and he wasn't submitting me, but I was just kind of feeling him out a bit, and he's trying to go for limbs and just snap them off in like a roll with this guy. And eventually I'm like, okay, you know what? This is gonna end. So I put him in an inside heel hook, and I just hold on to it, because like when you get into an inside heel hook, you generally, you guys know it's not the kind of submission. The threshold is very small for destroying someone's knee and then them not being able to walk properly for a year. So I just hold it and look the guy in the eyes. And normally when you apply that submission, people will look at, okay, yeah, you got me. They see that you're not moving. This guy just starts thrashing side to side and then sprints the wrong way out. And then we hear click, 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 click. I look at him, he looks at me, and he's like, it's good, don't worry. Let's go. We stand up to wrestle, and his knee just slides right out of place in front of us.
Oh my god.
They're insane. Like, yeah.
See, it's funny, and that's the reason I reference that. That's exactly my point. Is I think sometimes a lot of my Khabib will win perspective is coming more from that, less from even the technical stuff, just in that kind of relentless Russian pressure, just get on top of you and hit you, and when you hit back, I don't feel pain. Like I'm not sure Khabib knows what color his blood is. I don't know if he's ever seen it. Like he's those guys they're just a different level.
Yeah. With that being said, I wouldn't put it past Tony to walk through an injured knee or something. Like,
for sure,
he's a different breed too.
Tony, the type of guy.
Crazy, to be frank.
Yeah.
Actually, literally insane.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that was it.
Oh. Sorry, my connection was getting bad for a second. Anyone say anything? I was going to move on to the next fight.
No, go on.
Yeah, go
All right. So okay, we have time to talk about maybe two more fights, maybe one. If you had to say which one is no one talking about, but is your favorite fight, your dark horse for your more excited fight, which one would you say? I'm going to go around the room. Anyone is free to start, but at any of this card, which one is the fight where you would say, you know what, people need to pay more attention to that fight?
Hold on, Mike. Are we talking on this card, or are we talking potential matchups?
Well, May 9th, I think May 9th is a potential card. So it's got featured 3 title fights. And of course, that banger with Francis Ngannou versus Rosenstruik. From that card specifically, which fight would you say is, the dark horse of an interesting fight, like fight of the night or whatever?
I think for me, the most, I want to split it into 2 categories, despite your...
Man, I just realized that. Go on, David. Sorry.
Okay, I was gonna split it into 2 categories. So one is, what do I think is the most, other than the obvious Ferguson versus Gaethje, in terms of most relevant fight? Henry Cejudo versus Dominic Cruz. Obviously, we
Yes.
have the other championship fight with Amanda Nunes versus our fellow Canadian. Shout out Felicia Spencer. But, you
She's
know,
gonna get killed. I'm
yeah,
sorry.
man. We watched her against Cyborg, and this is the lady who beat Cyborg. So, you know, but anyway, the most relevant for me is probably Cejudo versus Dominic Cruz, which is just ridiculous. I can't believe Cejudo is doing this again and just going on it's almost like a fate, like a rock star who knows his time is up and is just going around like all the big cities and doing his like biggest hits just one last time.
That's
Um,
Cruz. That's Cruz, not Cejudo.
no, it's a Hudo. I know the analogy I'm trying to use because it's almost like he's going to the biggest star possible rather than going to who is deserving of the fight, or sorry, who's deserving of the title challenge the most. And it's pretty obvious. First Jose Aldo, now Dominic Cruz. He doesn't want, in my opinion, want to fight anybody relevant. But for me, the most exciting, obviously, is going to be well for me is Francis Ngannou versus Jair. I just hope we don't get another Francis versus Derek Lewis. Yeah, but the last thing I will say on that is that I heard a rumor about both Francis and Derek being injured for that fight. That's why it was so boring. I think that's just an excuse, but yeah.
Interesting. If I could jump in, I think that I agree that you know, Triple C definitely knows on how to jump onto a good opportunity when he sees it. Mind you, I think that within the division, a lot of the legitimate contenders, there's logistical issues that are preventing them from competing. Peter Yan not being based out of North America and Russia, I believe, banning travel for a lot of sorts of reasons. And Aljamain Sterling saying that he's turning down potential matchups with Cody Stamann. I heard because he's not able to train right now. So I think that Dominic Cruz may be, kind of the last man left standing, despite the fact that he hasn't fought in 2 or so years. But I
A
agree with you.
fortnight. He hasn't fought a fortnight. Okay?
Yeah,
Like that.
but I think I agree with you about that Cruz versus Cejudo matchup. I think that's a fascinating fight, especially because Cruz is someone who's going to try and draw Cejudo out and move backwards and force him into a chase, going to cut angles on him. And it's a lot more difficult to wrestle with somebody as well when they're moving backwards. They're not consenting to you wrestling with them. So for me, at least, maybe not as a banger, but as a technical matchup, that's fascinating, especially because Cejudo now with his new karate style where he's trying to, circle to the inside, I believe, draw you out and hit that counter rear hand. I have no idea how it's going to go, especially with Dominic Cruz and all the time off. But it's a fascinating technical exercise, I think.
For sure, especially when you consider, the last match with Dominic Cruz versus TJ Dillashaw and how that stylistic or how Dillashaw's style gave Cruz some problems. It'll be interesting to see how Cejudo, deals with Dominic Cruz's style and vice versa.
And I don't think these new MMA fans out there know just, Dominic Cruz is the man and was the man for a long time back in the day and was always in the pound for pound considerations and has been somebody who's been able to consistently come back and shake off ring rust. And, but, this being much later in his career, there's obviously a lot of questions around around this, how effective he's going to be. But, yeah, what the rest of you guys think?
I as well like the Dominic Cruz versus Cejudo fight. I think these are two title contenders. So, uh,
Um, Cejudo being the champion, he's not a contender.
right. But like these are two guys that like deserve to like have that title status. So I like this fight, but I also like the Spencer versus the Amanda Nunes fight. Two very good fighters. So those two are also that's also a matchup that I think is going to be a good one. Francis Ngannou versus Jair. I don't know too much about that fight, but I know that Ngannou's very skilled. So Yeah, those ones I like, but definitely the Dominic Cruz versus Cejudo fight is definitely one that's underplayed. That is definitely going to be a big matchup.
Sorry, just two quick technical points on the two fights you raised, Jeremy. The Dominic, well, actually not the Dominic Cruz one, the Felicia Spencer versus Amanda Nunes. I think this might be the fight where we learn just how good is Amanda Nunes's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Because if I'm not mistaken, Felicia Spencer is a black belt and is supposed to be like the bee's knees when it comes to women's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at that weight at least.
I mean, I don't know, man. I think we're gonna learn in that fight what color Felicia Spencer's blood is, and I think that is going to be an awful lopsided fight. And
Hilarious. And then the other one is
I think it's
Francis
going to be a ball.
Ngannou.
Like, I'm
Sorry, I was just gonna say Francis
sorry.
Ngannou is supposed to be his style I think is technically boxing. I know he's a knockout artist, but what happens when he faces a significantly more polished striker than him? Because Rosenstruck has that kickboxing background and is a more well-rounded striker, and isn't past the post like Overeem or some of the other dudes that Ngannou might have fought. So those are two technical questions I thought were interesting.
Well, I mean, I remember Rosenstruck versus Overeem, and Overeem kind of shut Rosenstruck down for what, like 24 minutes and 50
Agreed.
seconds?
Yeah, it was
You know?
bad. It was bad.
So it's not like Ngannou's going to be facing some tech. Like, he's not facing Cyril Gagne. Like, that's not what's happening here. He's facing a guy who's also a narco artist who relies on his power as well. Right?
Yeah.
It's just ungodly power. Like, ungodly amounts of power.
I see Ngannou as somebody, and mind you, we don't know what kind of technical improvements he's made in his style. We certainly know that he's capable of making rapid technical improvements because, this is a guy who started off his UFC career not even having correct footwork, literally crossing his feet when he stepped side to side in his stance. But I don't know. It could strike me as a boring matchup, being that both of these guys are counter strikers who kind of wait on a hair trigger for you to step in and then just swing for the fences. We could have another Lewis Ngannou on our hands. Because point taken that both of them may have been injured in that fight, but when you have two counter strikers who sit back and wait for you to enter in, it could turn out to be a very, very boring affair.
Like Adesanya versus Romero.
Perfect example.
Yeah.
Coach, what do you think? What's a fight you're excited for on that card?
Not the Ngannou one because black guys just don't hit with any power. So it's you can't think about it. Name one black guy through history who could punch hard. You can't. You can't even name one.
All I can think of is all the white guys who just knockout artists.
Exactly. It's always white guys. So I couldn't even say that. I tried not to laugh, but there was no doing it. No, I hate to jump on the bandwagon with everybody, but it's the Cruz Cejudo fight is the one I'm the most pumped about. I just love Cruz. I don't think, in terms of mental toughness, I don't think there's anybody tougher than him. You look at his post-fight interviews, his loss to
Garbrandt.
Garbrandt, thank you. And he said, you know what, I'm a high-volume fighter, and the plus side to that, obviously, is that I land a lot of strikes. The downside is that I can get countered, and, I just need to make some adjustments. Like, I'm always impressed by Dominic with how, it's something like Stefano was saying, that you after a loss, these things take a long time to process. Something that's crazy about Dominic is he will lose and be very emotionally unattached and methodical about that loss 5 minutes after it happened. And that's scary. Guys who can do that are scary. So I'm really hoping Dominic puts a beating on Cejudo. That being said, it's what Stefano said. It's true. It's a tough fight. Yeah. So that's the one I'm the most excited for. And man, it just I don't know anything about Cejudo, but he drives me nuts. He just drives me nuts.
He always strikes me as that one guy who's like he has the disposition of that the dad of one of your friends who keeps trying to crack jokes that don't quite land?
100%. 100%.
I love it. I love it. Not everybody can be the cool guy. I think MMA has way too many cool guys.
He's just, I don't know, he's too short to be champion, and that's coming from a very short guy. But,
Mike, are we missing any matchups on this card? I know that Ed Hardy's fight. I'm personally excited to see Ed Hardy get his. Sorry, I won't dignify the man by using his actual name.
I was like, wait, we're doing Fashion Wars now? Like, what is this?
Yes.
2005?
Ed Hardy, the woman beater, will be fighting on the card.
Hilarious.
Greg Hardy, the woman beater.
You don't know? Wait, you don't know Greg Hardy?
Wait, what are you talking about? Of course I know Greg Hardy.
No. Danny's saying that he doesn't know.
sorry, guys, the baby. I know of the name. I can't put a face to it.
Okay, so
It's the former NFL player who accidentally beat Alan Crowder.
yeah. So to brief you, he was one of the NFL's better players. I believe he got kicked out of the league after he was found out that he.
No, he actually got to play. He just flamed out. He flamed out.
Yeah, he viciously beat his wife, and then took some time off the NFL, I suppose. Started fighting MMA, linked up with American Top Team, and now he's in the UFC. And he's kind of like, he's like not. Wait, just to finish, he's doesn't have any hope of beating any elite tier fighters. But for a while, the UFC was feeding him cans essentially until he ran into Volkov. But yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna add that not only just for some context into why people are so visceral in the reaction is that it's not just your run-of-the-mill domestic violence, but he threatened to murder his girlfriend at the time, or I believe the mother of his children, and threw her on a pile of guns as a threat, which I think is like the whole like media sensationalized bit. But needless to say, he's not a very popular person. She was taken to court. Some people
lost in court. Then the appeal came, and they settled on the appeal. So he didn't actually face any jail time.
Exactly.
Oh.
So it's not like he was like acquitted or anything. It's just that the witness chose to not. The victim chose not to proceed with charges. Yeah. So.
And this is.
Like,
sorry. Go on, Coach.
Even with the threat of violence, it's like of murder. As soon as he's putting his hands on her, like I'm done. You know, I'm happy to watch him get beat from one end of the cage to the other. That's
here's my gripe with it though. He's clearly not elite level talent, and he's also somebody who's, I wouldn't say he's been apologetic, but he's never really come out and made a formal statement to be like, hey, this is what happened. These are the steps I've taken to retribution, and kind of almost seems like he refers to himself as a bit of a victim in the whole situation. So for me, it's okay. Well, that being said,
because it's not that I disagree with you. It's just that if you put yourself in his position, especially if you've gone through a lawsuit and you have a very strict NDA where you're not allowed to talk about anything that has to do with that matter at all, then of course you're not going to want to use it as some kind of pivoting point. That's what me and you would do, but especially if you have an NDA, then it makes it a little bit more difficult. And I also want to just add this, that I also think he's trying to do a WWE play, in that I think he's still a little bit confused about what his gimmick is, in terms of whether he's going to be a good guy or a bad guy, whether he's going to be a face or a heel. So
to be honest, I disagree.
About him, one no. He trains at Top Team, and I've heard from Top Team members that they actually think he's a nice guy, which is weird.
I mean, there's plenty of people who thought the same thing about Jeffrey Dahmer. Before they found out he was eating those gentlemen, that he would have gotten glowing reviews. But to be honest, to counter what David just said, there's a difference between disclosing specific matter that happened within a legal case and talking about the steps that you've made towards retribution and rehabilitation, and why something like this will never happen again, and why you deserve a shot in the UFC. And I mean, here's why I disagree with the UFC letting him fight. He's clearly not an elite caliber fighter. He's clearly not going to be fight in a title picture anytime soon. And Dana's cut people for being, for being far less competent, for having far less technical potential. He's cut people. It's clear that he's there literally just as a spectacle and for the name value. This for me, it reeks of the same kind of CM Punk sideshow freakery that the UFC puts on from time to time. The difference is this is a huge moral stain on the UFC, I believe, even allowing him to fight.
I agree.
Yeah, something tells me the UFC does not care about morality at all. I just wanted to talk just quickly before we run out of time about some of the other little sleepers that I'm a little excited about. Jacare Souza versus Uriah Hall. I mean, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me?
That's like undercard. That's on the undercard, guys.
Like, you gotta be kidding me, man.
What about Fabricio Verdum, Alexei Oleinik?
Woo!
Let's
Battle
get
of
it.
the dads.
Battle of the dads, yeah. Alexei Oleinik, his striking looks like he's, just got challenged to a fight at his son's soccer game. Like, why?
I'll have all you young bucks know that Verdum and gentlemen in his age are in their prime. They're in the best age you could be. Thank you. And
If you say so. I've heard a rumor that Alexei Oleinik was middleweight at one point, which is ridiculous, or light heavyweight or something like that.
Let's be honest here. All heavyweights are blown up middleweights.
Oh, that's funny.
a good chunk.
Francis Ngannou, who is a very sleek human being.
Listen, man. Until the UFC lets such super heavyweights in, like Bob Sapp and Giant Silva, I really don't think we can look at the UFC's heavyweight division with much legitimacy.
Or they need to put in a cruiserweight or something like a 205 to 225. Something like that.
I agree. Mind you, I think that if they were to do that, it would create a competitive cruiserweight division and a gaping hole in the wall where the heavyweight division used to be.
For sure. Well, they'd have to start bringing in, like you said, they'd have to start bringing in the Ake Bonos and the Giant Silvas and the,
Guys, it's just fine.
I don't know if I want to see that. Yeah.
I don't want to see, I want to see,
Rest in peace to the GOAT Emmanuel Yarbrough.
Sorry?
I just said rest in peace to the GOAT Emmanuel Yarbrough, but go on.
I want to see, maybe Abdul Rashid, who, walks around at, 280, but other than that, I'm good. It's fine. I'm cool with it. It is what it is.
Yeah.
Oh, one person we didn't talk about on the card, though, is Donald Cerrone versus Anthony Pettis.
Oh, my God.
Man, I don't really care about that fight, though. It's both, no disrespect to both legends, obviously, legend, but they're both on, 2-fight losing streak or 3-fight losing streaks, if I'm not mistaken. They both are coming
build that one up, yeah. You can't really promote that one.
Yeah,
you
they're
can.
both coming off,
You can't
the
promote
biggest
that one.
fight.
No, but we're talking about what fights are being underpromoted. I don't think that fight's being underpromoted.
I just don't think that's, a good fight. I don't know why they would even put that one up.
What do you mean? It's fireworks.
It's a great fight. We're going to see two guys go after it.
Dude, you could have that fight under any circumstances. I think that fight is a fight night headliner in and of itself, regardless of where in their career.
Okay, I don't know about headliner. All right.
No, a fight night headliner. I said a
fight night
cool.
headliner. I would agree.
Fight night headliner, Mike. Yeah.
I would agree.
Okay.
Also interesting was gonna be Vincente Luque. I thought that was a really interesting one versus Nico Price, because he's just coming off a loss against Stephen Wonderboy. But he's only got a fan-friendly style. Yeah, he got destroyed. And then Bryce Mitchell also.
Yeah, those are two gentlemen that if you put them in any fight are going to be entertaining, both of them.
Yeah.
Quick, brief question: are we doing a story time segment at the end of this, or is that not a thing right now?
It would be irresponsible if we had a guest coach who's probably forgotten more stories than we have combined.
Is that a CTE joke?
No.
Ooh, that hurt.
No, Coach, I just want to give you pause. If you feel comfortable, you can pick any story from your long and illustrious fighting career. But I have to warn you that I already have told the story on the podcast about I had no idea there was going to be ground and pound.
It's pretty good.
Coach was there with me when that happened.
Oh, was that it was the guy from the bottom? I was throwing big punches. Brah, brah, brah. That was, by the way, that was my butchered Trini accent. I apologize to all Trinidadians / Jamaicans who I sounded like I butchered there. Yeah, that was a pretty good night.
Aside from that, I think anything's fair game, aside from NDAs.
I got knocked out in 8 seconds. That was tough. That was a tough loss.
Yeah,
So,
I want to hear about that.
yeah, I fought an American wrestler kid, shorter than me, thicker than me. So it was a dream to fight someone shorter than me. It was really nice, but he was a lot thicker, a little fridge. He was like 5'2" by 5'2", very kind of Cejudo-esque in his build. So we'd only had one tape on him, and he was just a blast double, like a very traditional kind of wrestler. Blast double, put you on your back, hit you. And we knew I was giving up a lot of strength to him on the ground, just in physique. And we knew I couldn't win the fight off my back, especially bottom side control, which was where this guy tended to live, and transition between scarf and side control. So we worked getting those double underhooks. So changing levels, and to get underhooks is I'm getting both of my arms in his armpits. So exactly in the style of Khabib and Conor, we come out, touch gloves, we circle around. He does a giant level change and comes over the top with a right hand and just hits me on the button. And like a deer in headlights, I had both hands down for underhooks, chin up, mouth open, just it was one of those perfect storms of me doing everything incorrectly and him doing everything correctly. And the worst part I found was a small little arena up north, was walking around in about the half an hour before I went to the hospital, walking around and hearing people, oh man, that's the guy who got knocked out. Oh man, that's him. That's the guy. And you're like, yeah, I can hear you. You know, I'm still. So that's tough. You know, things like that where you train for 8 weeks and you have a very specific opponent in mind, and you're invested like that, and the bell goes, and 8 seconds later, you've got a cloth in your forehead, and your coach is doing this, and you say, hey. And I remember the first thing I said was it a knee? I thought maybe he hit me with a knee. my coach said, no, it was an overhand right. And yeah, those are tough. Those are tough, and it really does make you kind of think for a second. Am I cut out for this? Do I belong in here? But again, I was very, very lucky in that my coach was, an amazing kind of motivational guy, and he was very much like, listen, this is part of the game.
Yeah,
happens.
That's something that I feel like is underplayed in fighters, and I just wanted to ask you, following up on that, could you just talk about what it's like to overcome something like that? Because I'm assuming that wasn't your last fight. So
no.
After you got knocked out, what were the mental steps you took to kind of go compete again? Were you back on the horse right away? Was there kind of like a negotiating period or a bargaining period where you were trying to convince yourself? Just talk us through that, because
right, yeah,
in everyday life we don't get embarrassed like that or have to feel like such low lows usually. So
for sure. Yeah, I think so. Earlier when I was saying that I was a mediocre fighter and coaching is really my strong point, I think the one thing as a fighter that I was very strong at was the mental game. So for me, just having my coach, who obviously I looked up to and worshipped and was my mentor, saying, this isn't a big deal. It's happened to me. It happens to the best fighters in the world. Let's keep going. Not to pat myself on the back, but I was pretty resilient about it. I think we were training about 2 weeks later, which is probably earlier than we should have, given the concussion. But, I wasn't sparring or anything. But mentally, I think I was a Fedor worshiper, and Fedor had lost. At the time, he hadn't. But, I think worshiping my coach as much as I did, and knowing that he'd been beaten and soundly, really kind of just made me, in my head, it kind of put me in the same category with my coach, who to me was a god. So it didn't, I was lucky in the sense that it didn't faze me much. I can honestly say I was gun shy for maybe 6 months after that. Someone would loop a punch and I'd kind of flinch and look away, and all those things beginners do that you're not supposed to do. But the fear of that punch being knocked out, it was the first time I'd been knocked out cold. I've been dropped before or rocked, but this is the first time where I could hear a crowd and then blackness, just dark, just out, which is scary because when you come to, your brain goes, you know, you don't even understand why you're there. You know what I mean? You don't know whether it was the second round or the third round. I thought it was a knee. It wasn't even close to a knee. So it really there's a fear in your kind of you really feel your mortality in that sense. But in terms of mentally moving past it, I think I was so lucky to have my coach was in the military, and he was very much like, listen, you just move forward. That's your only choice. You can pack it in or you can move forward. He was very kind of black and white and kind of a hard ass. But for me as a student, that's what worked for me. I needed that, like, hey, suck it up, get back to work kind of guy.
Wow. That's a lot to take in. And I think it's also a very important message for a lot of people out there who are thinking of competing or fighting, you know, not just to know the risks of what could happen, but, you know, a lot of people fear a loss, but it's an important message to hear that life doesn't end necessarily after a loss. You know, failure is not fatal, defeat's never final, kind of thing.
Of course. And not to, you know, I tell my guys, try not to rethink your life. You know, a loss doesn't mean you're on the wrong path. It doesn't matter what career you're doing. Like Jeremy with football, you can't. I find that other athletes are often better at MMA fighters because there's a team, and because, I mean, how often does a football team have an undefeated season? It's very rare. So I think as a football player, you get a loss, and even though it sucks and you don't like it, you don't rethink your career. You just go, well, we were off as a unit today. We weren't moving well. We weren't reading well.
Yeah.
Whereas as a fighter, I think you're more likely to be like, no, it's all me and I suck and I need to change plans. So I think other athletes tend to be, I don't know whether it's the fact that it's a team sport. I think as a football player, you can kind of be like, I was on my game tonight, and you know, like the wide receivers shit the bed or whatever. You know, you can pass the puck a bit. I've always, one thing I do hate, it's a kind of maybe a bit off topic, but it's a beef of mine, is I'm really outspoken critic of the coaches who say my fighter lost because they didn't follow my game plan. That drives me insane, because in my perspective, if you're going to be one of those coaches, you better own it when they lose. You know, if they win because of your perfect game plan, great. But then they lose, it's because they didn't follow your perfect game plan. Well, you have no. It's like an investment. Like, you know, that coach wants all the limelight and none of the failure. So what I always say is, if they didn't follow my game plan, I didn't make that game plan muscle memory. I failed somewhere at implementing it into the fighter before they got in the cage. Because I will hog the credit when they win. I'll be the first coach to be like, that was my genius game plan. And when they lose, I'm the first coach to say, yep, I made mistakes in the camp. You know, there are things that I need to fix for the fighter. And I'm okay with having both, but I get really irked when the coaches take the success and dodge the failures. They put the failure on the fighter and the success on the coaching. And you can't, to me, that's just, it's got to be one, it's got to be both, you know.
Wow. That was, I appreciate you being very, very candid, especially with, you know, a moment that's as personal as a loss, especially on knockout. You know, it's, not a lot of people would be willing to open up about something like that and like where to move forward from that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Sorry if that was an insensitive question.
No, not at all. It's, I think something that will help with the sport is when more fighters, excuse me, acknowledge fear. And I think something that really needs to go from MMA is this. There's a stigma around tapping from strikes, for instance, which I think needs to go desperately. The perfect example is Conor and Khabib. The amount of guys I heard say, I don't know why I tapped, the choke wasn't even in. And I'm trying to explain to people, he was breaking his neck. Khabib could separate vertebrae there. Like, what he was doing to Conor is far more dangerous than a rear naked choke. A rear naked choke is the least dangerous thing that's going to happen to you in an MMA fight. Do you know what I mean? But we have the stigma where if he tapped from a choke that does no damage, he's a man. If he taps from his vertebrae separating, he's a bitch. And that's just like, it's so backwards. You know, it's so backwards to me. A choke is I've been choked out on the mats. It's one of the least dangerous things we do. You know, a neck crank is an extremely dangerous thing. So that's something I hope will change. And I think talking about this and being very open and being like, listen, I was scared on my way to the cage. It sucked getting knocked out. I think the more we humanize these kind of things, that macho bravado and stigma will kind of leave the sport.
Yeah, that's why I love Mike Tyson's podcast
Mysteries.
because
Hot boxing, yeah, I love it.
yeah, because he's like being open about he was like the baddest man on the planet at one point, but he's telling us like how he was scared and how he went into a lot of fights, like scared of being humiliated and everything like that. So yeah, like I think that those kind of discussions around combat sports is very helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I'm obsessed with cultures, and I'm obsessed with especially sporting cultures and the different kind of norms within them. And what's really interesting in MMA is that it's still a really, I don't want to say toxic, but there's a form of
Yes, toxic.
masculinity. Yeah, okay. There's a form of like masculinity, which is morphed into this like toxic beast that we can't control, and it's, as you said, it's led to things like where people can't even acknowledge that they lost. They can't even, be honest about a situation simply because their pride's in stack. We see it every day, even in like the gym, where you have a group of 10 guys and each guy thinks they're a stud and they're all trying to knock each other out. And you've already talked about kind of how important it is to increase the accessibility of MMA in order to get that kind of some kind of normalcy back into the culture. Because yeah, I agree, and thank you for even bringing that up, Stefano, because I've heard a lot of interviews that have gone completely left when somebody talks about a loss or a knockout or even something. You can just think about Tony Ferguson during the last press conference where they're
Oh
commending him. Yeah, they're commending him about his overcoming one of the darkest things, one of the hardest things you can possibly do, way harder than fighting for some people, mental health issues. And yet he's so like reserved and the toxic mess. No, go on.
Uh,
You
oh
can
no,
you can
yo,
counter
sorry,
what
yeah,
I'm
no,
saying. I might be wrong, but I just want to say that I feel like there's still that element within the culture where and it's so weird because this is a very homoerotic, very personal
okay,
sport.
come on now, David.
No, I think
Don't
I
be
think
talking
though,
about
like
Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu
it
like
does
that,
go
dude.
to show you though there
This
are
isn't
some
this
things
isn't
with the
fetish
sport.
wrestling, my man. I don't know what you've been watching lately, but get off those websites, right?
Wait,
Get
so
onto
you guys
UFC.
don't do Brazilian jiu-jitsu in the mud? Is that what you're saying?
I train in the mud all the time. It adds, it's more realistic. You've
Okay,
got
what about the bikinis?
well, it's a realistic form of training gear. I think a gi provides too much fabric, so like a bikini, it's just like a nice, there's just a few handles, but I just to your
Can
Tony.
you imagine saying of a triangle like using a bikini strap, like the bikini strap instead of the gi strap, like the gi, like you use a bikini strap to like set up a triangle? It'd be hilarious, you know?
Yeah, I feel like you've put a lot of thought into that one, Mike. I just to quickly address something David said. Well, I agree with largely what you said. I feel like there's a lot of different subcultures within MMA. I feel like a lot of MMA fighters that come out of like a Brazilian jiu-jitsu environment tend to be a lot more nerds who can fight, but whereas there's like the more meathead kind of MMA gyms. I feel like the fan base in MMA is definitely that
100%.
the most toxic, yeah, element. And I feel like as far as Tony Ferguson, I'd cut him a bit of slack because while his response may not have been the most like not deft, wrong word, may not have been the most tactful, I guess. I don't necessarily blame the guy for someone saying, hey, this deeply personal and traumatic thing that you experience. I want to commend you on that, and please open up about it to the public. And it's difficult, and these people, while they have a certain side of their life that's in the limelight and they are public figures to an extent, some people want to keep their lives a little bit more private, which I understand. I don't think he has a responsibility necessarily. I think the fan base in MMA is a lot of what drives a lot of toxicity in the culture, though.
100%. The last my wife and I went to a UFC years ago when it was in Toronto, and I said to her, like, we'll never go back. There were fights in the stands. To me, it was a lot of guys who lived at the gym with frosted tips and affliction shirts. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
Who doesn't love an affliction shirt?
What's that?
Who doesn't love an affliction shirt?
Yeah, I think it's the combo. It's one of those things where you can get away with one and it's not so douchey, but then you compound like 5 things and you get the uber douche. But yeah, we just had guys, one guy sat beside me and explained MMA for the whole 4 hours. Like somebody take him down. He's like, oh, he's in side control here. This is where he wants to have his, and I'd be like, oh, thanks, man. And you just smile and nod and go into it. And yeah.
Oh, the amount of quote unquote experts is astounding. Like people who have never been in a fight in their entire life, but just have the confidence to tell you. I have a friend of mine who's, I was like, yeah, I have a grappling competition coming up. He's like, oh yeah, so a fight. I'm like, no, well, not really. And that's one of my least favorite parts of training. I think the worst part about being an MMA fighter is having to explain the difference between grappling competitions and MMA and, just he's like, oh, so a fight. I'm like, no, not a fight. He's like, yes, it's a fight. I'm like, okay, you're the expert. You tell me. tell me why I'm incorrect. Or like people that have called different fighters pussies because they're taking the fight to the ground. Or,
Whoa, hey,
sorry. I meant kittens.
You have no excuse, Stefano. This is a Christian podcast. You know the rules.
Right.
Jesus, dear Lord, the baby Jesus, please forgive me. But yeah, no point. I guess point remains that there's a ton of experts in MMA.
But I would agree that the fan base is, and it's getting better. But man, if you want to talk about toxic masculinity or something like that, I'd say a good chunk of the fan base embodies, I think, all of those things that people have issue with. I'm not really sold on toxic masculinity as a whole, but that's a whole other. I think that's a whole other.
What do you mean? It's great. You should try it out. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, that's right. I have beefs with all that stuff, but yeah.
That should be a topic on this podcast one day.
Yeah, I do.
Nah, B.
I think there's.
No, I honestly, if it wasn't for toxic masculinity, like I probably wouldn't be like
the man I am today.
Yeah, like I wouldn't be a first team. I wouldn't be a first team defensive tackle. Like there's good and there's bad to it. Like I'll be completely honest with you. There's good and there's bad to it. Like there's sometimes you have to somebody has to say stop being a bitch. And I'm sorry.
Whoa, hey,
I'm sorry.
Okay.
No, but like somebody has to tell you sometimes you're being soft and you have to man up. So I think there's good and there's bad to it.
Yeah, I agree. I think the phrase "man up" has gotten a lot of too much negative attention because there are cases where it's like, you go to your 10-year-old son, like, oh, you're crying, man up. Like, that's obviously not an emotionally healthy way to deal with a child. But if somebody genuinely does need to act like an adult, maybe it's the right, thing to say in the moment. But I agree, like, there's, traditional masculine behaviors that are, exist for a reason. And then there's, because they helped us evolutionarily succeed. And then there's traits that, actually are toxic, that are associated with being, that kind of stereotypical.
Yeah.
For sure. And I definitely think, and then just to build, I 100% agree, Stefano. And I think that also there are not only traits that, have been proven to be toxic, but the traits that are just not relevant today. But once again, I agree also with Jeremy in that there's benefits to both. That there's benefits to being, hyper masculine, benefits to being hyper feminine, but at the same time, there's also downsides. I am just a person who believes in balance, and I think MMA gyms in general MMA in general, the fan base could do with a little bit more balance and a little bit more nuance in the opinion.
Sure. Yeah.
My opinion.
Coach, you were going to jump in?
Oh yeah, it's funny. when I say I don't believe in toxic masculinity, it's not that I don't believe there are things within the modern day spectrum of masculinity that are toxic. There absolutely are. My beef is that there's things in modern femininity that are absolutely toxic. There's things in straight culture that is toxic. There are things that in gay culture are toxic. There are things that in Christianity and Islam and there's bad groups of people within every group of people, and there are bad ideologies within every good ideology. I think I take issue with the targeting of masculinity more so than I'm taking issue that there are no problems with it. There are absolute problems with modern day masculinity, but there's problems with everything. And let's just call it out. Let's call out where there's weaknesses and let's fix them. I'm all on board. But I mean, don't get me started on that Gillette commercial. I could do a 2-hour podcast on that.
Wait, do you actually want to? We can do this.
Yeah.
No, guys.
Maybe not right now. Maybe not right now. But I would be down to discuss that god awful.
Just so I can search it. What Gillette commercial?
You know the Gillette, the best a man can be, like a couple of years back. Was that a year back? When they did like a commercial on that whole like, I'll show you later.
I have a slightly nuanced opinion on that commercial that I don't necessarily want to get into until we have a significant amount of time to get into it. I mean, if you guys want to, we can, but I don't know how much time we have.
We are 2 hours in. We have no time.
Let's take another day.
Yeah, my boss is gonna pull me any second here.
All right. Yeah, same too. It's also my boss's birthday, so.
Yeah, my ball and chain wants to watch a movie tonight, so like yeah.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Do we have any more questions or?
Like.
Okay, it depends on you guys because we do have an Ask Questions segment, and I did say I did promise the listener that was gonna be on the episode. With that being said, it'd have to be super, super, super quick. Are we down?
I kind of want to give the fans their if they took the time to write in, I'd rather give them a full kind of thought out response than rushing it at the end of the episode. But it's up to you guys. I
agree. I think we should release we should record a separate response. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, I'm down to do that later in the week.
Agreed.
Or we can do the Toxic Masculinity podcast.
Yeah,
I like that too, but yeah.
I like that.
Okay, What?
Michael, I'm sorry, Stefano. I was gonna ask Michael to take us out, but if you wanna talk.
Oh no, I just wanted to do our weekly plea to the fans and then ask Coach if he had any, obviously he would want to shout out his gym and any other people want to shout out before Mike.
Right.
Kind of Mike, let us out.
Takes us home.
Oh,
yeah. We are not open, 6ix MMA, but I don't think anyone is. So we're at 610 Queen Street West, Queen and Bathurst, and we got a good group of guys there. It's pretty diverse. I'd like more white fighters if we could, but we're gonna work with what we got. See, it's nice to be able to joke, man. Everybody gets so bent out of shape today, but yeah, it's funny. We actually had a guy come in once and say, you got to change the name. We were originally called Black Devil MMA, and a guy came in and said that's racist. And I said to him, what do you mean it's racist? And he said Black Devil, and I said no, it's black the color, man, not black the people. And then he said,
hilarious.
This is what he said.
I am so offended right now.
He said, well, why don't you change the name to White Lightning MMA? And I said to him, well, so I'm calling white people lightning? He's like, no, man, like white the color. And I'm like, but that, oh my god. Yeah. Yeah, that's it. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It was good.
Man, this has been really fun. Thank you for being on.
Cool.
Can I do our
by the way,
go on.
The door is always open. If we had like a friend of the show shirt, we would give it to you. But like, coronavirus, and like we don't really afford that. So yeah. But thanks for coming on and hopping on the show today. Stefano, do your thing where like tell people to come or else you'll choke them to death or something.
I will choke you to death, but that's whether you come or not. So you might as well get some good entertainment before you feel the life slipping from your body as I sink in that Darce choke. Guys, I've heard you crying out from your pathetic lives saying that you're bored in these times, which I find it hard to believe that you're bored. We have limitless entertainment. The Leg Kick podcast, we have a back catalog of content talking about mixed martial arts, talking about politics, talking about sports, everything. Every week we're out here pouring it out for you. So the least you can do, subscribe, like, go through our podcasts, and send us your firstborn child to work for slave labor.
No.
Yes,
That's not
yes.
what we want.
We want your firstborn children. We will consider secondborns, but
Males only, though.
males only, please. No females, no woman. So yeah, guys, like and subscribe. You can find us just about anywhere. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on wherever you can find podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, including Spotify, including if you have Android, the Android podcast app. And we're also, Mike, we're not streaming live on Facebook right now, are we at all?
No, yeah, it's not right now. But
These are strange
when we get
times.
back up.
But that's pretty much all I have to say. Like and subscribe, guys. And if you like the content, also tell your friends about it. You can bring a little bit of enjoyment to their miserable lives.
Because they are miserable. Okay. In this crazy mixed up world where there's the coronavirus and then there was rain. It was raining for a little while, which is kind of sucky. Just remember, you got three things. You got family, you got life, and you got the pursuit of happiness. No, I'm kidding. This podcast. And don't say anything different. All right. Later, everybody.
Later, man. Have fun editing this one.
Oh, and a big thank you to Danny Beauclerc, 6ix MMA, for coming on to the show today. Like, he's a boss. So, please.
Thanks, guys.